Thank you very much, Seth. You mentioned the history of this organization. I hope everybody got their 180th anniversary pin. No other organization in our community can claim 180 years of service to the Jewish people and to the state of Israel. Very proud of it, and we are really pleased that we're able to come together in this 180th anniversary year. I wanted to talk today about what happened after October 7th. Everybody watches the news and follows it closely. So we don't want to go into too many of the details that you already know. But let me start this way. One of the hostages being held by Hamas right now is my cousin, Sagi Dekelchen. He's 35 years old. He was up very early on the morning of October 7th. He likes to tinker with old buses. So he acquires these buses from Eged or from Dan. He's got a couple of them in the kibbutz yard. It's at kibbutz Nir Oz. Some of you may have been to Nir Oz during this period since October 7th. And he was up early, and he was the first on the kibbutz to see the terrorists arriving. And he immediately sent an alarm. And then he went into this unit that every kibbutz has, which is kind of a self-defense unit. He's not in the army, but they have their own self-defense unit. And he made sure, he made sure that his wife and his two daughters were safe in the safe room. And then he went out to fight the terrorists, and I assume just ran out of ammunition and was overwhelmed and was taken to Gaza. Now, the rest of the story is an interesting story. His mother, who is the granddaughter of my mother's first cousin, who was the only survivor from that branch of the family from Lithuania, and the only reason she survived is because she came to what was then pre-state Israel and Palestine in 1934. So she is the granddaughter of that sole remaining family that my mother is from in Lithuania. Two of her uncles were killed in the service of the IDF. One in the Yom Kippur War and one in a military plane crash in the Sinai Desert. This is not an unusual Israeli story. Every Israeli family has this kind of tragedy or knows someone that has experienced it. Now, the rest of the story is like this. His mother, Nomit, was filled with shrapnel, and she was dragged from her house at Nir Oz, thrown into a wagon, like a golf cart, with others, and they were about to take her into Gaza. This must be some hours after the attack that this happened, when an IDF helicopter hovering overhead was able to fire on the terrorists. She fell out of the wagon, and she played dead, and she survived. The rest of the story is that Sagi's wife was pregnant, 7 months pregnant, and their third daughter was born while he has been in captivity. So in all of the demonstrations that we see on campus and all of the discussions about going into Rafah, not going into Rafah, I haven't heard a single word about the hostages. We hear about it, we talk about it, we wear, I don't have mine on today, but some folks have the yellow ribbon lapel pin. We talk about it, and there's nothing said about these hostages. Now, the latest news is, as of yesterday, something is expected very soon, we're told, and a new agreement for a temporary ceasefire and the release of hostages. I don't know how many hostages, if this deal goes through, and this is supposed to happen today or tomorrow, but you've seen that we've been disappointed so many other times. So we don't know what's going to happen. The last I saw was that Yahya Sinwar, who is the head of Hamas and who probably is holed up somewhere in Rafah, or maybe he's in Khan Yunis somewhere, we don't know, he's in a tunnel somewhere. said that that Hamas will not enter into a deal unless there is an end to this war and a withdrawal of all Israeli forces from Gaza. It's not going to happen, and it shouldn't happen. And it shouldn't happen. They perpetrated this war. They perpetrated these terrible atrocities. And by the way, we don't hear about the hostages, and we don't hear about the Israeli women who suffered such terrible violence at the hands of Hamas and these terrorists on October 7th. So there may be a deal in the next couple of days. The Israeli government has said it wants to prosecute this war until the end. There are 3 or 4 or 5 brigades left of Hamas in Rafah. Israel has called up a couple of reserve brigades, and maybe that will happen. Netanyahu said a couple of days ago that he would give Hamas a week to accept this deal, and if not, the military effort in Rafah will continue. But having said that, what happened 7 months ago was a terrible blow to all of us. It was a terrible blow to the Jewish psyche. I said, even at the time, there was a debate for a couple of months about whether this was exactly like the Holocaust or it wasn't like the Holocaust. Let's put it this way. The 9 or 10 hours of these terrible atrocities were a glimpse into exactly what the Holocaust was all about. The Holocaust, the killing of Jews from 1939 to 1945, and we take it back to 1933 with Hitler coming to power, but the killing of Jews from 39 to 45, what Hamas did is what the Nazis did on a daily basis, 24/7, 365, until May of 1945. That's exactly what they did. That was a glimpse. And of course, it was the worst day, the worst terrorist act against the state of Israel, and the worst situation of the killing of Jews since the Holocaust. Now look, let's talk about the war itself, and then we'll talk about the demonstrations on the university campuses. The war itself, Israel called up over 300,000 reservists, and what it did in Gaza City and what it did in Khan Yunis was really according to their textbook and has been quite successful. The last element in this is to finish off Hamas in Rafah. And there has been a worldwide protest, some micromanaging Israel's war effort and some simply who want to save Hamas to live another day, not to go in to Rafah. Now, why not? So they say, well, look, where are the Palestinians going to go? There's 1 million Palestinians in that general area. The Israelis have said that they are going to do everything they can to move those people out. But one thing let's not lose sight of the fact that Hamas is an asymmetrical enemy. It's an asymmetrical enemy. No one has ever, in the history of modern warfare, no one has ever fought an enemy quite like this. Not that it has hundreds of thousands of soldiers, that's not the point. But it has alleyways, and it has tunnels, and it has hospitals, and it has mosques, and it has schools. And they have used all of that under the protection of surrounding themselves with the civilian population in Gaza. So no one has had to fight a war like that. But there's been a lot of eitzes, I say in Yiddish, a lot of advice. A lot of advice to Israel. Don't drop 1,000-pound bombs. Don't drop 2,000-pound bombs. Drop only 500-pound bombs. Be more precise. Be careful. Don't do this. Don't do that. Look, I tell you this. We Americans fought 2 wars over 2 oceans, thousands of miles away, to preserve democracy, save the world for democracy, and with what Wilson said in World War I. To save the world for democracy and to prevent those enemies, the Germans and the Japanese, from arriving on our shores. We went thousands of miles away. In order to shorten the war in Japan, there was a firebombing of Tokyo, and 140,000 people were killed in 2 days in the firebombing of Tokyo. 25,000 were killed in the firebombing of Dresden to shorten the war. And if I had been around at the time, I would have said, To shorten the war? Absolutely. And it took 4 years. It took 4 years to defeat those enemies. The Gaza border from Nir Oz, from my cousin's kibbutz, is 2 kilometers. 2. And it's about 4 miles, more or less, from Khan Yunis, in the center of Gaza. And I think this advice to hold back and pull back, Benny Gantz, who was a former chief of staff of the IDF and who was here in Washington about a month ago to discuss this whole issue with the administration, said, well, what you're telling us to do by holding back and pulling back in Rafah is it's the equivalent of a house that's burning. We put out the fire in 80%, but you say, look, let another 20%, let it burn. Israel cannot have another October 7th. It can't, and it shouldn't have to. And yet, the advice is to pull up short and to hold back. We'll see what happens. Look, the administration, the first 6 weeks of this war, Joe Biden was very clear about where he stood with Israel. He made a trip to Israel, first president to visit Israel during wartime. He even said, when Hamas started to put out these figures of first 20,000 civilians and then 30,000 civilians, when they kept putting this out, I remember a news conference that Biden had where he said, you can't believe those figures. It comes from Hamas. He said it. He said it. And then something happened. Somewhere along the line, something happened where we went from full-blown, I've got your back, to some kind of trying to be balanced. Now, some people say, and you're going to hear more about it from Josh Kraushaar a little bit later, who is an expert on elections. Some people say that our upcoming presidential election is driving this. Why? Because to win this very close, and you've seen the polls, Trump and Biden, they're very close, that to win this election, you need certain states. We call them, for those from out of the country, battleground states. Could go either way. Michigan is one of them. Michigan has a large Arab American population, a city of Dearborn especially. We've got, where's Peter? We've got a Michigander here. He can attest to this. And so some people at that point said, well, the election really hinges on Michigan, or Michigan and Minnesota, or Michigan and Nevada, or Michigan and Arizona. I mean, whatever it is. And look, we all understand, we had a famous Speaker of the House of Representatives here, Thomas O'Neill from Massachusetts, a great Speaker of the House, very close to the Kennedy family. He was the one who introduced that line, all politics is local. All politics is local. And I get that. And that's what drives, we have a great democracy here, and that's what drives our democracy. But principle has to make a difference also. And you have an ally, and that ally has been brutally assaulted by Hamas. And it's an ally that is attacked by Hezbollah, which is a proxy of Iran. It is attacked in Eilat by the Houthis, who are a proxy of Iran. It's been attacked by the Iraqi proxies of Iran from Iraq to Israel. And the godfather of all of this, the puppeteer of all of this, is in Tehran. It's the regime in Iran, which attacked Israel with 300 rockets and drones just a couple of weeks ago. Look, the administration continues to supply and resupply Israel with weapons. We're appreciative. U.S. pilots, together with British pilots, helped Israel immensely in the Iranian attack. Also with the help, I would say, of the Jordanians and we believe the Saudis and others who were helpful. But the point is to come back to Rafah. If Hamas is not finished in Rafah, it will come back, it will live another day, and it will be worse for Israel than it was before. There needs to be understanding about this issue. By the way, I would say just one other thing. In this effort to kind of be even-handed, some things have been said which are just plain wrong-headed. Secretary of State Blinken said a few weeks ago, You were dehumanized, you Israelis were dehumanized by Hamas, and now you are dehumanizing the Palestinians. That is not the case. And let me now come to the issue of the genocide charge. The genocide charge is the worst blood libel directed at the Jewish people ever. There have been other blood libels. The 1840 blood libel in Damascus, medieval blood libels, poisoning the water. I mean, all of the, you know that from medieval times, I mean, you know all of these blood libels. The Jews did it. And there are modern versions. The most modern version is the one that is out there today, that Israel is committing genocide. Now, what is genocide? What is the definition of genocide? By the way, the word itself was introduced by Raphael Lemkin. Lemkin worked with the United Nations after World War II. Jewish guy from I think may have originated in Poland many years before that. And he's the one who introduced it. The definition of genocide is the intent to destroy in whole or in part an entire people. It's not what Israel is doing. And the Palestinians and their friends know, and that gets to the campus, the Palestinians and their friends know that the one card they think we hold is that we were victims of the Holocaust. And in their minds, that is the reason for that we are behind the state of Israel. And the only way to level that playing field is to say, nah, you're a victimizer. You're the one who's victimized. You're carrying out genocide. You say you're a victim. The Palestinians wouldn't admit that we were victims of genocide. But other people will admit it. Some of the European leaders, for example. They'll say, you were victims. Well, we get it, between 1939 and 45. But now you're doing the same thing to the Palestinians, and it's just not so. It's a lie. It's a lie that's been helped by the media here, by people in Congress, overseas, at the United Nations. And the word genocide is being thrown around like that's what the Israelis are doing. Do you know that representatives of the IDF Judge Adjutant General Corps, the Corps of lawyers inside the IDF, they are assigned to combat units. So when they sit in a control room and they're sending an airstrike, or they're sending a rocket in, or the helicopters up, there are lawyers who are checking to see whether there will be undue civilian casualties on the ground if Israel is to make that particular attack at that particular moment. I don't know, maybe other armies have it, but certainly Israel has it. The head of the Institute for Urban Warfare at West Point, not Jewish. He's not Jewish, and he's the head of the Institute for Urban Warfare, and he is an expert on the correlation of civilian casualties and combatant casualties. And he says that it's the lowest in the history of modern warfare. Now, we were in Mosul in Iraq not that long ago. There were a lot of casualties in Mosul. I've talked about the firebombing of Tokyo, or the firebombing of Dresden. It's the lowest in modern warfare. So what we have here is an absolute lie. It's a lie. And we have to turn that around. Now let's go to the campus, because we don't have a lot of time here. We have about 10 minutes left. And I'm sorry that we don't have time for questions. You've heard the chants. Go back to Poland. Burn Tel Aviv to the ground. Zionists deserve death. That was one guy from Colombia. This one is just a few days ago. You may have seen it on TV. We will not rest, we will not rest, we will not rest, 3 times, until we divest and the Zionist entity falls. So Hamas, another one, we love you. We love your rockets too. Burn Tel Aviv to the ground. At UC Berkeley, as students of the university, they said, as students of this university, we have no choice but to take action as UC Berkeley stays silent about our people's genocide and remains complicit in the mass murder of Palestinians. Now, is that free speech or is that hate speech? This is a blood libel, and we have to follow the money. Where's the money coming from? These kids who are out, where's it coming from? Who's directing it? Well, we know a lot now, and hopefully we'll know more, because we stand behind congressional investigations of the money trail. And we stand behind bringing the FBI into this issue to find out exactly who's directing and who's funding. So these organizations, the funding we know comes from the Open Society Foundation, from the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, from an organization called Westpac. I mean, there are a number of places from where the money is flowing to these organizations. These organizations are the National, what is it called? The National Students for Justice in Palestine organization. There are a whole group of front organizations that have been created. And I want to tell you, this is not something new. This is not something new. Anybody here remember the Holy Land Foundation? So the Holy Land Foundation was founded in Texas in 1989. And it's a pro-Palestinian, was a pro-Palestinian organization. It was previously called the Occupied Land Fund. And I should give you an idea of what this is all about. In December of 2001, the U.S. designated the Holy Land Fund as a terrorist organization, seized its assets, and closed the organization. At the time, it was the largest Muslim charitable organization in the United States. It had been under FBI surveillance since 1994. And in 2004, a federal grand jury in Dallas charged them and 5 of its officers with providing material support to Hamas. They sent $12 million. This is 20 years ago. They sent $12 million to Hamas through various front charities in this country. And they were finally closed down. But what we guess is that many of the people who were involved in that effort, maybe not the ones who were charged and who were convicted, but many of those wind up in these front organizations. So in other words, what's going on the campus today did not start yesterday. This started a long time ago, and we're seeing the effect of that effort. I had mentioned the group, the National Students for Justice in Palestine, but there are other pro-Hamas organizations, including the Jewish Voice for Peace, I might add. The Americans for American Muslims for Palestine, the U.S. Palestinian Community Network. Even when you hear it, it sounds like these are front organizations. The Palestinian Youth Movement, USA, and also a group called Within Our Lifetime. Now, what can we do about all of this? And law enforcement is, you see what's happening on the campuses today. By the way, I was on campus during the Vietnam years. There may be a couple of others in this group that were also on campus at the time. I see some comparisons between the tactics of what's, not the issues, but the tactics are very much the same, where people lie down in front of the police, they have to be dragged away, they have what we call guerrilla theater. There was something on TV, you may have seen this the other day. There's one of these demonstrators dresses up in military fatigues, and she's got a little bag on the side here which has a Star of David. And there are 3 people kneeling in front of her with their hands behind their back. You saw those pictures in Iraq before these folks were beheaded. You know how they're kind of looking down. They've got their hands tied. They're on their knees. And she goes to each one, and she takes out of her this little bag. She takes out this blue powder, blue, right? State of Israel. And she puts the blue powder. It's almost like kind of a fairy godmother. She takes the powder and she goes, and he falls over. And she takes the powder and it goes on and the guy falls over. Guerrilla theater. These kinds of tactics, barricading and all of these things, those were the tactics we saw in the late 60s and the early 70s. But the difference is, there was a war in Vietnam. It was an unpopular war. It was America's war. And a lot of the people on campus, frankly, I'll be honest with you, and I was right there, I didn't want to go in the Army because the casualty figures on U.S. troops were very, very high. I mean, you know the entire story. This is a case, this has nothing to do with that. This is a case clearly just to call for the elimination of the State of Israel. So quickly, what can we do about this? The administration the FBI, the Department of Justice, we need, by the way, we need a full-time designated special envoy, or it won't be an envoy because it's not overseas. We need a person who is designated to monitor that should be their responsibility, to monitor anti-Semitism in the United States. That has to be done. We don't have it. We have Deborah Lipstadt, who is special envoy. She's ambassador for anti-Semitism abroad, but we don't have someone doing this here. We need the FBI involved, and we need the Justice Department. We need people at the highest level to speak out and speak out strongly. Members of Congress, we've got a growing group of critics of Israel. You saw Bernie Sanders the other day. Bernie Sanders said, you know, this is going to be Biden's Vietnam. Well, we need to stop that group in Congress because if Israel has to go into Rafah, there will be a strong effort to stop the shipment of American weapons to the state of Israel, and we have to watch that group carefully. We supported the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, which is very important, and it passed the other day. Unfortunately, there were 91 votes in Congress against it. 91 votes against it. Not very happy about that. We need increased pressure on university administrators to stand up and be counted, and we have to also look to alumni and donors to these universities to do what Robert Kraft has done. Robert Kraft, the owner of one of our big football teams here, to do what he's done, to say, I'm not giving anymore. That's it. I've had it. By the way, the Jewish Center for Students at Columbia University is named for the Kraft family. We need to press the major media in this country to be responsible. They are viewing open hatred and harassment and worse of Jews and not commenting accurately on it. There's a columnist here in the Washington Post the other day who was saying, oh, it's great what happened to George Washington University. The police weren't called out. She said, she knows, this was a columnist in the Post. I know of only one instance, and that was somewhere, I've forgotten, maybe it was at Northwestern. I know of only one instance where a call for killing Jews was said. And she said, then that has to be verified. One instance, we see it on TV all the time. The media has to be pressed. They're adding fuel to the fire. We need a strong push for Holocaust education in every single state in this country and in countries abroad. Unless young people learn what happened to the Jewish people between 1933 and 1945, we will be facing more waves of the mindless, vacuous demonstrators and their puppeteers that we're witnessing on American campuses. The Palestinians and their friends are doing everything they can to deny the Holocaust, and we've got to set that record straight. For B'nai B'rith, we need to redouble our efforts at the United Nations. You heard Seth last night, to speak truth to power. The den of iniquity that the UN has become for Israel requires that we speak out at every turn against the double standards and bias of the UN in New York, Geneva, Paris, and in other locations. We also need to lead an effort to remind our fellow Americans and so many others outside this country of the tremendous contributions the Jewish people have made in the fields of medicine and science and technology and culture, entertainment, and so many other areas. We didn't just land here yesterday as Martians. We have made tremendous contributions as a people to the welfare of American civilization and civilization abroad, and we've got to redouble those efforts. And finally, let's always remember, we have nothing to apologize for. No apologies. No apologies. Israel, the central focus of our lives as Jews, is a remarkable island of creativity and democracy and inspiration in a sea of darkness, in a sea of death cults, extremism, and authoritarianism. We must be careful not to submit to a version of the Stockholm Syndrome, where we begin to doubt and we forget what Israel stands for in our lives and in the family of democracies amidst all the voices we're hearing from Israel's enemies and its hyper-critics. And here I go back to the phony charges. Do you know Israel had to go back into Shifa Hospital a second time? I'll be through, Sharon, in 1 second. Israel had to go back into Shifa Hospital. You probably read this. After all the big thing about the rocket hitting the hospital, they took out hundreds of Hamas operatives who were hiding in the hospital just a few weeks ago, while half of the hospital was continuing to serve its patients. Operations were going on. People were being tended to. What people in the world would have done that? Hospitals would have been leveled. You have Hamas in there. You have hundreds. You level the hospital. And you go in the medical side of that building, and they were taking care, and then they took care of, Israel took care of the rest of it, thank God. Our organization, from the establishment of the first B'nai B'rith Lodge in Jerusalem in 1888, has stood behind and bolstered the idea of Jewish sovereignty and the rebirth in a modern state of Israel of the Jewish people. Now, more than ever, we need to be true to that legacy and stand behind Israel and strong against those who seek to harm it in any way. Now, finally, we're living through a pivotal moment in Jewish and world history. We have an important role to play as B'nai B'rith to seeing us through the rough seas in which we find ourselves. And as Seth said last night, and I will say it again, given the proud record of B'nai B'rith, I know that we are more than up to the task. Thank you.